Hello everyone, Santa here. Welcome to Fisherman's Haven with a lovely overview of the Wizard's Tower. And today I'm talking about Divine Favor, or in this video. And so Divine Favor, just as a quick refresher, it does give you some additional healing on your monk spells. So most of the time you are definitely going to want to have some amount of Divine Favor, because without it, your healing capabilities dramatically decrease. So these skills being good is really useful because you do want to put attribute points into this line, or into this attribute, I should say more specifically, because the skills that you are, because the effect of the attribute is worth using. So you want the skills to be kind of good. It's a little bit of a mixed bag. So we're going to go ahead and go through these, starting with Blessed Aura, which is a maintained enchantment. All maintained enchantments cost 1 pip of energy to maintain. I don't know if they actually had the back-end tech to make them cost more, but certainly that would require something to be very good. So Blessed Aura does cost 10 energy to cast, 2 seconds to cast, and has a 2-second recharge, and 1 pip, like I said, to maintain. It is an enchantment spell, and while you maintain this enchantment, monk enchantments you cast last 30% longer. So this is kind of like an enchantment weapon mod. I'm going to be honest, I've not really ever used this. There are some monk enchantments where it'd be nice to extend the condition by another couple of seconds, but honestly... So, I mentioned in the intro that monk energy pools are very tight, that they get stressed a lot. Blessed Aura is adding to that stress. I can run an enchanting staff, and obviously this would stack with an enchanting staff. So I imagine multiplicatively, so that would be an additional 1.2 times 1.3, whatever that works out to be. Not quite 1.5, but they're close enough. So they would definitely last longer, and that certainly has its benefits. That said, I'm not ever really wanting this. It's kind of just clunky. Yes, it's useful to make my enchantments last longer, but the cost of the pip is just so severe. And let's be honest, using up a skill slot kind of matters a good bit too. That I just never really want this. I am going to give it a 2. Because I could see trying to run it with some enchantments that, like Spellbreaker, for example, if you're for some reason trying to run something with that, or Spell Shield, making these last 30% longer. There's some other ones as well that I could see, like Healing Seed, making that last 13 seconds. It's all nice, but honestly, like, it's very, very dubious if it's any good. And it's very expensive. It really is very expensive. So that brings us to Blessed Light. Blessed Light is 10 energy, 3/4 second cast time, a 3-second recharge, elite spell. Heal target ally for 114 health, and remove 1 condition and 1 hex. So usually, if I am running Blessed Light, I do like this one a reasonable amount. Usually if I am running it, I am going to want more Divine Favor, in which case it does heal for a good bit more if I get up to 14. This is a little questionable. It's not one that I like to run on the AI, because I don't think the AI is going to use it very well, but it's one that I enjoy using. To be clear, it is completely worth its energy cost if you do all 3. If you heal them for the amount of health, and you remove a condition, and you remove a hex, doing all 3 of those is really good. Doing only 2 is not good enough. So this, despite being kind of a pet spell, and one I quite enjoy, it's in fact on my skill bar at the moment for demonstration purposes, and being very efficient, it is a heal and a condition removal and a hex removal. Like, it's very efficient from a skill bar standpoint, and it has very low recharge for a hex removal. This is one of the lower recharging hex removal spells, actually, I have to imagine. It is also taking up your elite slot and 10 energy, and it's the 10 energy that's the huge problem for it. If it was something where it was like, if it didn't do all 3, it only costed 5, it would be stellar, and I'd want to use it a lot. But as it is, it's just a bit too pricey to really be something that I do regularly. I am going to give it a 3. This is a weird sort of 3. This is a sort of 3 that's like, I like this spell, but just like, Monk Elite slot is super, super tight. And this is one that can kind of crack through, but it's just never one I will ever consider for the AI, and that bumps it down a bit, because I'm not playing Monk that often, right? I have other professions that I play a good bit too. This isn't Divine Favor, so I'm not using it outside of that. So, frankly, the times that I do run Monk, I do run it sometimes, but there's a lot of other options too. So, it's a high 3 for me just because I like it, not because it deserves it. Blessed Signet. 2-second cast time, 10-second recharge. As a Signet, no energy cost. For each enchantment you are maintaining, you gain 3 energy. You cannot gain more than 20 energy in this way. So, Blessed Signet is... You never bring this unless you are specifically maintaining enchantments, in which case you're using Blessed Signet to help you maintain them. There is a build that we'll touch on later when we get to protection prayers called a Bonder. It is specifically referencing, if I go and give you some context, there is a spell here called Life Bond, which is where the name comes from. This basically allows you to reduce damage that allies take. It often combos with Life Barrier. And so you can pile Life Barrier and Life Bond on allies to make them super duper durable. But then you have huge amounts of energy degeneration. So if you're doing something with a lot of maintained enchantments, then Blessed Signet is vital. Those are very specialized, finicky builds. This is a classic 2 for me. In the situations where you want this, it is absolutely amazing. But outside those situations, it is not worth using at all. Boon Signet. So Boon Signet is 1-second activation time, 8-second recharge, no energy. Elite Signet. Heal target ally for 68 health. Your next healing or protection prayer spell that targets an ally heals for an additional 68 health. So this one's kind of cool. It's kind of fun to use, but it's honestly really clunky. Note that it doesn't have a definite duration. You activate it, and then it will be active, until you use your next spell or you zone transition or something. So this effect is actually pretty solid, but it uses your elite slot, and Monk Elites are particularly tight. So to me, this is kind of like a 3. In that, I am marking it as a 3. I think the effect is like, yeah, this is reasonably solid. It does the thing that you want. It doesn't cost energy to heal people, has reasonable stats on it. Like this right here at 12, and if you're bringing this as your elite, you might want a little bit more, but at 12, this is healing for, what is that, like 136 HP? That's pretty solid, but it takes up your elite slot, and like I said, Monk Elites are very, very tight. So that's a bit of a high cost to use this skill, so I generally wouldn't bring this unless I specifically wanted to try to mess around with it. And that's not something that happens very often, so. Contemplation of Purity. 5 energy, 1/4-second cast time. Actually, activation time is a skill. 10-second recharge. Skill, lose all enchantments. For each one lost, you gain 64 health, lose 1 hex, and lose 1 condition. Maximum 7 hexes and conditions. So, it's important that this is a skill in that it gets around things that might make it hard to use otherwise. This is powerful response in PvP if you're getting like dogpiled with stuff and you are some sort of build that is maintaining an enchantment on yourself. In that sort of situation, being able to pop this to clean yourself up, get a bunch of health, clean yourself of hexes and conditions, that's really strong. Works well with Divine Boon, which we'll cover in a moment. I remember back in the day running it with the Mesmer enchantment Mantra of Recall, which doesn't do anything for 20 seconds and gives you some energy. If you pop this, you'll get the energy from that right away and cleanse yourself and heal yourself some. So it could kind of slot into those sorts of bars, but this is not something I would just randomly bring, right? I'm going to give this a 2. It's very useful in builds that use some sort of enchantment that you're applying to yourself. So maybe you're using Divine Spirit and Divine Boon, and then drop like a Reversal of Fortune on yourself and pop Contemplation of Purity to clean a bunch of stuff up. Stuff like that can be quite effective, but it's a great effect to have because it can kind of slot into certain types of builds, and it's useful in certain types of builds and completely, well, at least super questionable in others. So it's kind of a nice spot, and I like that standpoint of it. Deny Hexes. This is 5 energy, 1 second cast time, 12 second recharge spell. Remove 1 hex from target ally and 1 additional hex for each recharging Divine Favor skill you have. So this works really nicely with Signet of Devotion that we'll get to later, and on some other builds potentially that might be running some longer recharge times, such as, say, Divine Spirit skills that would allow this to be able to be very effective at removing multiple hexes. The only reason to bring this is if you are going to reliably be able to remove multiple hexes from an ally. If you are not set up to be able to make use of that clause, I would rather one of the other hex removal spells, such as Remove Hex, which has only an 8 second recharge, or like Cure Hex, which heals them. So there's some other options for getting rid of hexes, but this one's serviceable. I'm going to give this one a 3, just because the conditional clause on it is pretty low. Like, that's pretty easy to meet. Again, you can just bring Signet of Devotion and be like, I heal you, and now I remove 2 hexes from you. And that's easy enough. Or, like, Heaven's Delight, and its counterpart. We'll get to those in a bit here, but actually when we get to Divine Healing, like, those are really useful to bring because having party-wide heals like that is really handy. So, like, bringing one of those and Deny Hexes, perfectly reasonable to do. So I feel like Deny Hexes is easy to slot onto a bar, but I tend to use like Cure Hex or something like that, or run Remove Hex on a Monk secondary. Those sorts of things for hex control before I run Deny Hexes. It's perfectly fine overall, but Divine Boon. Ah, yes, this one. So this is 1 energy pip to maintain, 5 energy, quarter second cast time, 10 second recharge enchantment spell. While you maintain this enchantment, whenever you cast a protection prayer or divine favor spell that targets an ally, that ally is healed for 51 health and you lose 1 energy. I believe back in the day this used to be better. I think it might have been all monk spells at one point in time. And I don't remember if it always had that lose 1 energy clause or not. But this has proven to be very strong in PvP. In particular, people would run this with protection prayers, obviously. There was a number of Divine Boon builds that have existed over time. This is certainly an interesting one. You're trading energy regeneration for stronger healing. But the way that this is worded, you're basically taking all of your protection prayers and stapling healing onto them. That certainly is a strong effect, but you do have to take into account the additional energy burden that this places on you. As it is, honestly, I think that they've moved this to a spot that's just a little bit narrow for PvE. Just because, like, it does not work with healing prayers. I think it used to, but it doesn't work with healing prayers, which is just kind of awkward. You really want a healing prayer to be able to add healing. Now, it does work nicely with, say, Blessed Light. But, yeah, it's... Divine Boon is kind of fun, but its energy requirements are very tight, so it's hard to play well. It's certainly not one I would be inclined to give to the AI, just because I imagine that they wouldn't use it very well. But I like where it sits. I think it provides a nice alternate playstyle, and one that can focus on, yeah, I can push up health bars, but I'm doing it with Divine Boon and predominantly protection prayer spells. It can allow you to kind of focus things a little bit differently, and I enjoy that. So I like that aspect of it. That said, I'm giving it a 2 because you do have to kind of build around it. You have to be mindful of the additional energy burden that it places. Yes, it does provide a lot of additional healing. It's basically a second divine favor to some extent, but applies some heavy pressure to your build as well. You might have to be giving up your elite slot to energy management. That was certainly done back in the day. Offering of Blood with Divine Boon or Mantra of Recall were both popular ways of helping to support the energy cost of Divine Boon. And trading in your elite slot for energy management is not the best. So in general, Divine Boon is a specific build that you're using and not like a general sort of skill that you're always going to slot into a bar. For example, it's completely worthless if you're specializing in healing prayers. So, yeah. But I like the play styles that it opens up, so I appreciate it from that standpoint. Plus, it has a sweet icon. Like, look at that icon. It's really cool. Monk has a lot of Ankh imagery for some reason. Okay, so that brings us to Divine Healing and Heaven's Delight. This is a case of factions giving us another copy of a skill. However, like, say, Penetrating and Sundering Attack / Shot or whatever, Blow, there's a Penetrating Chop and Sundering Chop, I think, and Warrior that was like the same skill where it's like, I'm kind of happy to run both of those, and especially the Ranger one. This is another case where I'm really happy to run both. So they're 5 energy, 1 second cast time, 12 second recharge, spell, heal yourself and party members with an earshot for 51 HP. So again, reminder, earshot is kind of a decent range around you. These are really nice party heals in that being able to heal your whole party is really valuable. Keep in mind, with an 8-person party, this is actually healing for 408 HP across everyone. It's really nice for like topping off health bars or compensating for party-wide health degeneration. So, for example, if there's a suffering on most of your party, being able to group heal that is really nice. I am often happy to run both. That can be a little bit much just because they are a bit of a longer recharge, but running both does allow you to kind of push bars up really nicely as well. So I'm quite happy with both of them. I don't always run them, but I often like to at least consider them. To me, they're 4s, Divine Healing and Heaven's Delight. Definitely spells that I'm quite happy to have on my bar. And yeah, it's a nice design spot to have as well. It's kind of, there's a healing prayer spell we'll get to when we get to healing prayers, called Heal Party, which has a much lower recharge, heals for a bit more than these do, but has a much higher energy cost. And so it's nice to have an alternative that's like, okay, I don't get to use this as much, but it still allows me to heal everybody. It's really nice from that standpoint. And so it's good to kind of have some different flavors on that sort of effect, if that makes sense. Divine Intervention. So this is really annoying when the AI uses it. It's 5 energy, 1/4 second cast time, 30 second recharge, enchantment spell. For 10 seconds, the next time target ally receives damage that would be fatal, the damage is negated, and that ally is healed for 197 health. So 197 health is quite a lot. It's not quite full HP for most characters. It's probably going to be around a third to like 2/5, basically, somewhere around 30 to 40% of their max HP. But honestly, if their HP is going down really quickly, this only lasts for 10 seconds, right? So there are other spells that can kind of do a similar sort of thing that have better durations. There's some in Dervish in particular. I don't like this at all. I understand the space that it's trying to play in, but honestly, and I'm not sure how it interacts with health degen, but I don't really care. The thing is, if you're dying that much, having this is not necessarily going to help a whole lot. There can be times where this is clutch, but it's just not worth a skill slot. It has a 30-second recharge, which is very long, and its effect is honestly going to be kind of underwhelming a lot of the time. I'd rather bring spells that just straight work, or there's some other options. Like Reversal of Fortune is way preferable to this, because Reversal of Fortune just straight up affects the next hit they take. So to me, this is a 1. I understand the space that it's playing in. It's a really cool idea, but it would need to heal for 2 to 3 times as much for me to really be interested in it, and it would almost also need to have like a 15-second recharge. At that point, I'm not sure if it'd be too strong. It certainly probably would be for PvP, But as it is, it's just too weak, and the effect might be impossible to balance in a way that's interesting anyway. I don't really want this of like, oh, they get healed for a lot, but there are other options for keeping your allies alive that aren't clutch landing and divine intervention. It's just not worth using in my opinion. Yeah. The other thing too is this is not a situation where you want to have a spell. Like, for this spell to be effective, you basically have to be failing at your job of monking. That's really what it comes down to. And making spells that are like built around you are going to fail, there are some times where that's really appropriate. Resurrection skills are a really good example of that. You are going to fail and need to resurrect your allies. Cool, that's something that you're going to want to do. But skills where like you basically have to be failing at monking, I would rather bring a resurrect, because that's a more I'm trying to formulate in my brain like this, like that works in more situations, or basically like this requires you to catch an ally right before they die, more or less. It gives you a little bit of buffer to try to heal them, but you're better off just like effectively healing them, and you're better off being like reversal of fortune you, then heal you, or something like that. Shielding hands, shield of absorption. There are other options for like trying to catch somebody who's dying, and this is not the way that I want to try to do it. So it's one of those things where like you don't want to dedicate a skill slot to I'm going to be failing at my job unless it's something that like really fixes the problem. Because the thing is, if you miss with divine intervention, and that's likely if you're failing at your job of keeping somebody alive, if you miss with divine intervention, then it just didn't do anything in the first place, whereas a resurrect will undo that. So it's kind of an interesting divide to try to identify, though, where is a skill that like compensates for failure well enough that you actually want to bring it, versus a skill that compensates for failure in a way that you don't. And divine intervention falls in line of you don't. At least that's my feelings on it. Divine Spirit. So this is 10 energy, quarter second cast time, 60 second recharge, enchantment spell. For 11 seconds, monk spells cost you 5 less energy to cast. Minimum cost of 1 energy. So this one is really strong burst energy management for situations where stuff is going down. I don't tend to use this one a whole lot, just because I would rather bring like a blood ritual necromancer, things like that. I think this is one of those skills that's better in PvP, where intensity can kind of vary and stuff like that, versus PvE. The other issue is in PvE, it is directly competing with Selfless Spirit, which, as you might notice, is a very similar space, but has better uptime and lower initial cost. So this is 20 seconds, makes your spells that target another ally cost 3 less energy. That's not quite the same thing as 5 less, obviously, but 1 versus 2, because most of your skills are going to cost 5 anyway, is not a huge difference. And this, like I said, 45 second recharge with 20 second uptime and 5 energy. Basically, in PvE, I'm going to want to bring Selfless Spirit more often than I'm going to want to bring Divine Spirit. Selfless Spirit, of course, was inspired by Divine Spirit. That said, Divine Spirit works on heroes, whereas Selfless Spirit doesn't. But like I said, I generally prefer to externalize my energy management into other professions like necromancer stuff and things like that anyway. So I don't tend to want to bring this all that much. I'm going to give it a 2. It is very effective at what its job is, which is to be like, I need to be able to heal everybody right now, and I need energy to not be a problem in that. And it does that. It does that real well. It also just, that's all it's good for. And this is a skill that really has a big opportunity cost. If you use this in an inopportune time, it just doesn't do nearly as much for you. So, Healer's Boon. This is 5 energy, quarter second cast time, 10 second recharge, elite enchantment spell. For 46 seconds, healing prayers spells cast 50% faster and heal for 50% more health. This, of course, applies to you only. If things don't say that they target like an ally or something, then they just affect you. So like you can't put Divine Boon on an ally, whereas you can put Watchful Spirit because it's target ally, right? So just something to keep in mind. This is something to apply to yourself. This is a very much so a build around me. First of all, it does not work, obviously, with either Divine Favor or Protection Prayers. It only applies to Healing Prayers. However, casting 50% faster is really nice, and healing for 50% more health is super strong. So, this is actually makes Orison of Healing... We'll talk about Orison later, but it makes, like, Ethereal Light significantly stronger. I don't have much Healing Prayers, so you're not seeing these at proper levels right now. And it makes Orison of Healing, which is normally kind of too weak to use, actually usable and stuff like that. It's a fun build. It is a specific build, though. When you're bringing Healer's Boon, you are building around bringing Healer's Boon. That is what you are doing. So, to me, this is a 2. It is a fun build, but it's not, like, I don't bring it very often. This is, and it's a very specific build, so that's kind of the spot where it sits. Heaven's Delight we already talked about. It is a copy of Divine Healing. So that brings us to Holy Haste, which is 10 energy, 1 second cast time, 10-second recharge enchantment spell. For 48 seconds, your healing prayers spells cast 50% faster. This enchantment ends if you cast another enchantment. I give this a 1. Here's the reason why. It doesn't do much. Like, so making my healing prayer spells, like I mentioned, making them cast faster is nice. That's what Healer's Boon does. It makes them cast faster. But Healer's Boon also, I don't know, does this whole thing of making them heal for a lot more. This is just not worth a skill slot. It's not worth 10 energy to cast it. Yeah, it lasts a good amount of uptime, but so the main reason why you want your spells to cast faster as a monk is that way you can catch stuff before they get killed. So if something costs it takes like 2 seconds to cast, there's a pretty good chance that they could die before you land the heal, or at least that's certainly something that can happen. It's something actually to keep in mind that we'll talk about when we get to Signet of Devotion. So, like, 1 second cast times are okay. A lot of monk spells cast in 3/4 second for healing, 3/4 second to 1 second, which is generally good enough. Making those a little bit faster just isn't really relevant. The thing is, most of the healing prayers you want to cast are going to be, like, you can see most of these are 3/4 to 1 second cast times, and the ones that aren't are like resurrection skills, and I guess making your resurrection skills cast faster is nice, but just throw them on your mesmer. So I don't like to bring resurrection skills on my monk. I like to bring them on like necromancers, mesmers, and ritualists, because I usually want my monks to be focused on healing and not resurrecting in the middle of battle, if that makes sense. And because mesmers can cast something like Resurrection Chant much faster, that tends to be my preference. So, like, making those faster just doesn't matter that much. Heal Party is basically the only thing that you might want to cast faster. Making other stuff take like half a second, it just doesn't matter most of the time. The effect of making everything faster is just barely minimal. So, there's some, like... Basically, the main time that you care about the speed of healing prayers, because the thing is, you're probably, like, most of the time, the monk builds that I'm going to be bringing are going to be hybrid. They're going to be using all 3 support attributes of healing prayers, protection prayers, and divine favor. Because they're going to be using all 3, I'm going to have access to some of those 1/4 second activation time protection prayers to help keep my ally alive if stuff is going sideways. So making my healing a little bit faster just doesn't really matter. And the only time it really matters is spikes, which don't really occur often in PvE because that requires coordination, and the enemies are generally not going to be that coordinated. That it happens on occasion, but it's more of a quirk of positioning and things like that. So that's a much bigger deal in PvP, and in that case, they still don't want Holy Haste. They're going to want Infuser. We'll talk about that when we get to healing prayers. So it just doesn't really have a place. It doesn't... The thing is, it would need to do something more. And ending when you cast another enchantment is just like the icing on the already this is awful cake, because Other enchantments are how I keep my allies alive with protection prayers. That ending this just makes it even more useless. So it doesn't really have a spot to be used. And that's one of the things that's a weird quirk in Monk. Monk is very specific on what's actually good, more so than some other professions, and this one is a prime example of something being awful. Okay, so Peace and Harmony. This used to do radically different effects, and then it was changed to this. I think it was some sort of energy thing. But anyway, it is 5 energy, 1/4 second cast time, 10-second recharge. It is an elite enchantment spell. Target ally loses 7 conditions and hexes. I believe that just kind of counts up like from the hexes and conditions down until 7 have been removed. So if you have like, I don't think it's 7 of each, in other words. For 3 seconds, conditions and hexes expire 90% faster on that ally. All of your smiting prayers are disabled for 20 seconds. So this is one of the other weird things that we're going to see come up sometimes is Monk has a lot of self-disabling, particularly of smiting prayers. They really, really, really did not want hybrid smiting healing type of builds. So Peace and Harmony fits into that, like, we hate smiting prayers being useful sort of thing that was going on. I think it caused a lot of balance issues in PvP, and that's part of why. We'll actually probably talk about it when we get to Smiter's Boon. But anyway, Peace and Harmony here. This is a very powerful way of cleansing stuff. If you're going to be going into an area where you want this, and like the additional like basically hexes and conditions expire instantly on that ally for a few seconds afterwards, is a nice bonus. But you're bringing this because it's a ridiculous cleanse. So I'm going to be honest. This is a 2. If you need a counter to piles of conditions and hexes, so a lot of pressure happening, honestly, you're probably bringing this more because of the hexes. It clears a lot of hexes out than for clearing out a lot of conditions, because clearing out a lot of conditions has some better options. Notably, Restore Conditions is superior. It will remove all conditions and heal. So if you want an elite, that's a better option. And there's some other choices in other professions for getting rid of lots of conditions as well. So there's more ways of dealing with lots of conditions. So you're probably going to be bringing this because it allows you to be able to just be like, and you don't have any hexes anymore. And any conditions you get are just kind of a nice bonus. So that's not something that happens very often in PvE. That's very specific. This does make it a decent counter if you were to do some weird stuff in PvP that you're running up against. But honestly, this is just not a skill that I want most of the time. The effect is really strong. It's not an effect that I need. And I need my elite slot. So the thing is, I would absolutely consider bringing this if it wasn't an elite, because the effect is good enough to actually be like, oh yeah, I'm totally going to slap that on a bar and just use it, but I need my elite slot, because the most powerful effects are in elite, and there's other things that are just more generally useful, and so I need my elite slot for that. And that's just what it kind of comes down to. So, Release Enchantments. So this is 5 energy, 1 second cast time, 5-second recharge, spell, lose all enchantments. Each party member is healed for 29 health for each monk enchantment lost. Of course, there can be other enchantments that are on you other than monk ones. This is a 2, because the effect is certainly useful, but I'm not going to use it. Basically, I would consider using this or Contemplation of Purity in the same sort of build, and I'm probably going to err towards this one over Contemplation of Purity in PvE, just because the effect is more useful in that situation. But this is not a 5 energy skill, because if you don't have monk enchantments on you, it doesn't do anything. You have to have monk enchantments on you, in which point you're probably having to invest energy on that. I can see using this in this sort of Divine Boon oriented build, or in conjunction with maybe Healer's Boon to pop that off when it's coming up for recharge. But I'm going to only really be using this in some sort of build where I'm using enchantments on myself, and then it allows me to be able to be like, hey, I am going to want to heal everybody. I can lose those enchantments to heal everybody and then reapply them, things like that. It's not... I like the design. I like the space it's playing in. it's a cool idea of like, hey, I'm going to turn all these enchantments in me into healing for my party. That's really cool. Just keep in mind, like, you're probably not getting more than 2 or maybe like 1 to 3 enchantments with this. So the amount of healing from this is naturally going to be limited just in that regard. And the low recharge and low energy are heavily compensated for needing to spend additional energy to put enchantments on yourself that you're going to then be removing. So this is not quite like, it's very easy to best case scenario overinflate the effectiveness of this spell, but it certainly is reasonable. So I find it to be fine, but somewhat unexciting. Scribes Insight. So this is 5 energy, quarter second activation time, 20-second recharge, elite enchantment spell. For 30 seconds, you gain 3 energy whenever you use a Signet. So this is an interesting one. For one thing, this feels more like a Mesmer skill to me than a Monk skill. It also has this weird tension in it. You need to be activating enough Signets to be able to be getting enough energy from this to warrant using your elite slot on this skill. Like, you need to be getting serious energy management from it. The problem is Signets are energy management by themselves because they do an effect without costing energy. So, like, to make this really gain you a lot of energy, you're having to bring a lot of Signets, which decreases the usefulness of this skill's effect. So it's this kind of weird, almost non-bow skill. So, honestly, from a design standpoint, like, you don't really want skills that are like this, that are like, hey, I reward you for doing a thing by doing the thing that that thing does. Like, you bring Signets because they're energy management, and then you get more energy management from it. It's just like, The other thing, too, is, so, the time when you really want this effect is when you are, like, in healing prayers and protection prayers. In that case, you have, like, Signet of Devotion, because, let's be honest, your Blessed Signet's its own energy management. You're not doing that with Scribes Insight. So you're running, like, Signet of Devotion and Signet of Rejuvenation and let's see. There aren't any Signets in protection prayers. There's a bunch over here in smiting prayers, but smiting prayers has, I don't know, the Signet of Castigation is energy management, and Defender's Zeal is energy management. That might be a little bit better energy management for my elite slot. And yeah, there's a couple non-attribute Signets, but Purge Signet absolutely wrecks all of your energy, and that's the only one that you could use with it. So honestly, I don't know what Signets you're using with Scribes Insight to make it worth it. Like, if you're bringing Signet of Devotion and Signet of Rejuvenation with Scribes Insight, you're getting maximally per cast of this. Like, that one's basically one's 9-second turnaround, the other's 7-second turnaround. So you can kind of alternate them, but, like, then you're spending all of your time activating Signets almost. What I'm getting at is this is kind of like a weird skill that, like, feels like it does a thing, but it just doesn't do a thing. So I'm going to give it a 1. It takes up your elite slot to try to be energy management by rewarding you with energy for using skills that decrease your energy burden. It's just a very weird spot. And so, like, this is not how I'm wanting to solve my energy management problems on a monk. It just doesn't work. Signet of Devotion. So this is 2-second activation time, 5-second recharge. It is a Signet. Heal target ally for 83 health. Signet of Devotion is really nice. Again, I like to have a healing Signet on my bar in order to be able to reduce the energy burden that I have. Has a nice turnaround time of 5 seconds. 2-second activation time is very long, though. This is more useful for, like, topping off bars than it is for directly, like, oh crap, this person needs healing now, just because of that activation time. I'm going to give this one a 4. It's very useful. Monks want something to be able to compensate for their heavy energy burden. Signet of Rejuvenation is, in my opinion, superior because of its 1-second activation time, and it can heal for more. But Signet of Devotion, if I'm going on more of a protection prayers, or like a, say, a Divine Boon, protection prayers, and Divine Favor sort of build where I'm not dipping into healing prayers, then Signet of Devotion clearly is the only choice, in which case I would tend to bring it on a bar. Like I said, I usually want some Signet healing on my monk. It's just whether or not I'm going to bring Signet of Devotion or Signet of Rejuvenation. Signet of Rejuvenation is my preferred choice, but I'm okay with Signet of Devotion too. Smiter's Boon. 5 energy, quarter second activation time, or cast time, 10-second recharge. Enchantment spell for 30 seconds. Your smiting prayers have double the Divine Favor bonus. In PvP, this is 25 energy, like 90-second recharge and lasts for like 5 seconds. There was a meme for being Smiter's Booned, which is to basically say that a skill is nerfed into oblivion. The issue was that the developers, ArenaNet, or particularly the people in charge of skill balancing, did not or could not figure out how to make the skill balanced in PvP, because this is a 2, to be clear. There's a very limited pool of smiting prayers that this works with. Now, it does mean that your Divine Favor bonus being doubled is going to be quite strong. So if you remember, at 13, I was getting like 42 health out of it. Doubling that to an 84 health is a very sizable heal. Like, getting an effect plus that is really, really, really strong. You'd use it with like reversal of damage and be like, oh, I'm giving you some protection and a bunch of health. Like, this is very good in that sort of smiting prayers build that uses like smite, reversal of damage is the main one, and then smite condition, smite hex. You kind of like throw those on a bar with Smiter's Boon, Ray of Judgment, and that's kind of your smiting build, sort of core. And then you probably have like Castigation Signet for some energy management, and maybe another skill or two. But the thing is, Smiter's Boon really supercharges that build's healing potential, but obviously that is one build. It's a build around me. It's a 2. It's an effective 2. Okay, Spellbreaker. 15 energy, 1 second cast time, 45-second recharge, elite enchantment spell. For 15 seconds, target ally cannot be the target of enemy spells. They can be the target of allied spells, which is relevant. Vow of Silence is a dervish enchantment that it's just for you, but it shuts you off from all spells, including supportive ones. You can still be the target of attacks and skills and signets and stuff like that, but not being able to be the target of enemy spells is very strong. It defends you against a ton of stuff. You can target any ally with this. It's bad, though. So, yes, you make an ally super durable against spells, but the enemy can still attack you. They can still do a lot of damage. It is 15 energy, which is a lot of energy. It has a 45-second recharge, which is very long. I would much rather this be 5 energy, 5 seconds, 15-second recharge, something more in that area. Quarter-second activation time, something playing more in that area where it's like emergency, you are being defended against enemy spells now type of skill, if that makes sense. As it is, it's one of those things where it's like, we're going to see a couple of these. Monk enchantments that have a really powerful effect, but horrendous uptime. I don't want to spend my elite slot on this. It's just not doing enough for that. So to me, this is a 1. I'm never bringing this. If I want that sort of effect happening in my party, again, I don't quite know why. It's just not worth bringing, but there are some other options of skills that they could use. Notably, I believe Shadow Form might defend you. I'm not sure what the shape of that one is right now. Obsidian Flesh, but that one's garbage. Vow of Silence is probably the best of this sort of category of spell, but honestly, it's just not worth trying to make your ally untargetable by enemy spells. Again, if this was like a 15-second recharge, 5 energy, quarter-second cast time, and like a 5 or 6 second duration, that might be cool. but it's just way too expensive, and like it needs to have that upfront cost for its duration, but the long recharge and high energy cost just completely torpedo this skill for me. Spell Shield. This is an interesting one. It's 10 energy, 2-second cast time, 30-second recharge. Enchantment spell for 17 seconds. While you are casting spells, foes cannot target you with spells. When Spell Shield ends, all of your skills are disabled for 6 seconds. Okay. So this is kind of dabbling in a similar space to Spellbreaker. This is something to defend your spells, right? Like, yes, it does mean that you can start casting a spell in order to be able to cancel stuff that's targeting you. That's kind of a cool thing. It's playing in a really cool area. From a design standpoint, in terms of what this generally does, it's a really cool idea. It is also not 100% uptime, which I have some issue with. It is a lot of energy. It has a long cast time. Long cast time does not play well with the idea of using this to protect your spells. And as we've gone over, there are other ways of making sure your spells get off. This has some benefits over some of those, because this will stop things like diversion from making your spells like getting suddenly caught by some of those sorts of things. But this is not something that I want. It makes all of your skills disabled for 6 seconds too when it ends. Like, so I tell you what, I would absolutely use this, no, I would actually consider using this if it was a maintained enchantment. If I could maintain this to have this effect, and even if it still had the when it ends all of your skills are disabled, that's a great drawback clause to that, because then enchantment removal screws you for a little bit. That would actually be kind of interesting. As it is, though, to me, this is another one. Like, it is so clunky. It is, the upside of it is very low compared to the downside of it. It uses a slot. It's 10 energy cost. It does not have perfect uptime. It takes 2 seconds to activate. When it ends, it blacks you out for 6 seconds. You don't want your skill bar disabled like that when you're a monk. I just don't want this. It's just not... The effect is useful, but not useful enough for the massive quantities of downsides on this. So it's a really cool design space it's playing around in. It's just everything around the design space is super clunky and awkward. Unyielding Aura. So this is 1 pip of energy to maintain. So it's a maintained enchantment. It is 5 energy to cast, a 1/4 second cast time, and 10-second recharge. It is an elite enchantment spell, and while you maintain this enchantment, your monk spells heal for 51% more health. When this enchantment ends, one random other party member is resurrected with full health and energy and teleported to your location. So to me, this is a 4. There's a couple of things that commend this. It allows you to be able to slot a resurrect, and a very good resurrect. Like, so teleporting the ally to you is actually really useful, because it can pull them out of a dangerous location. And then with full health and energy is very strong. Like, you do not get full health and energy on resurrects, typically speaking. And the additional healing is really useful. Additionally, you can borrow this from an ally that has it using the Mesmer skill that copies an elite from an ally. I forget the name off the top of my head, but and because this is maintained, you can apply this and then not have to worry about it ending. This is very strong. It does take a pip of energy regeneration, and it also, and this is important, it also takes up your elite slot. So that's some downsides. Now, keep in mind, you can kind of get around that by having another ally bring it. But this is very good. This is a very strong spell. This is definitely up there with ones that I would consider using, particularly because of the resurrection clause. And note, when you die, this ends and goes off and resurrects somebody, I'm pretty sure. Don't know if it can resurrect you or not. Fun fact, this spell was originally a maintained version of Vengeance, which is a no attribute skill we'll get to later. But basically, you could use it to resurrect an ally with full health and energy, and while you maintain this enchantment on them, they'd stay alive. When the enchantment ended, they'd die, but not suffer any death penalty. That was kind of a fun one. That's still the PvP functionality, but they experimented with this in PvE, and they made a really useful skill. I remember reading stories about people using it to control aggro-happy Leroy Jenkins type characters of like, oh, you're running into a huge mob of enemies. Well, I guess you just fall down now. It's quite amusing. Maybe not quite worth an elite slot, but a cool idea nonetheless. And this is certainly playing in that space of being a powerful resurrection skill. That's preferable. So I quite like this one. It's quite effective. I seem to have... Oh, okay. I need to correct my thing here, because Unyielding Aura is definitely a 4, but I missed Spell Shield somehow. It goes straight from Spellbreaker to Unyielding Aura. So I don't know how I missed that. But the thing where I write these down. First time I've had that issue. Okay, let's go ahead and move on to Watchful Healing. I was wondering why I'd written down the 4 in the Watchful Healing spot, and I was very confused. So Watchful Healing is 5 energy, 1 second cast time, 10 second recharge. Enchantment spell, for 10 seconds, target ally gains plus 3 health regeneration. If this skill ends prematurely, they gain 102 health. So this is going to end prematurely if it gets removed for some reason. Maybe you cast it on yourself and use Contemplation of Purity to end it early. Maybe a enchantment removal spell is used and they gain health from that. I don't like this one. The amount of health regen you get from it is poor. So, for example, that 60 health, it's a interesting design space of like, oh, if it ends prematurely, then... Like, if it ends early, then they get a bunch of additional healing off of it. But this is one of those skills that's worth maybe, like, 2 or 3 energy to me, not 5. The recharge is kind of long. I would really want this to be kind of a Healing Breeze variant. Maybe not quite as much, but I want it to get up to, like, 6, maybe 7 health regen at, like, 16 Divine Favor. To really consider at these stats, like that would need to be like 5 or 6 at 12 Divine Favor, to be clear. It's just underwhelming to me. I have technically brought it, but not been happy about it. I'm gonna give this guy a 2. I don't think it's, like, wretched or anything, but, yeah, this is not what I want to be doing. Watchful Spirit. So this is 1 pip of energy to maintain, 15 energy to cast, 1 second casting time, 5 second recharge. Enchantment spell. While you maintain this enchantment, target ally gains plus 2 health regeneration. That ally is healed for 150 health when Watchful Spirit ends. So this is a cool idea. You place this on them, it helps keep your ally alive, and then you can end it to give them a sudden burst of health. It's not 15 energy cool. This would be perfectly fine at 10 energy. It would be a little too good at 5, because then you would cast it and then double-click it to end it, which would be 150 HP heal for 5 energy, which is pretty strong, honestly. And for kind of like what's effectively an unconditional heal, that would probably be a little too good for 5 energy for non-elite for how they're balancing everything. That might be okay, but in Divine Favor, that's maybe a little too flexible. That might be okay in Healing Prayers, but probably not in Divine Favor. This is a 2. I don't usually bring this. It's way too expensive. There are some really gimmicky type situations where I might use it with Mending, which we will see when we get to Healing Prayers, which is all about the health regen, the health regeneration aspect. And so being able to stack those can work pretty well. I think I might actually, if I look at my builds, I don't know if I have, yeah, I have potentially used it in, oh yeah, Mystic Regen totally outclasses any of that sort of shenaniganry. I have had builds that have theoretically tried to make use of it. It's It's not a great choice, though. Yeah, I have it right here in this low-level area runner, just because it's like, oh, I get a bunch of additional, and it plays well with Contemplation of Purity. It's a design that I really like conceptually. Like, it's really flavorful of like, oh, I'm watching over you, and it makes you a little bit more durable, and I can end that watching to give you a bunch of health. So it's really cool and flavorful in theory, but in practice, it's clunky and expensive. So, I don't... Like, the maintain effect is a little too weak for the amount of energy that is going into it. And the... Because that's basically 18 health for 1 energy is not bad, but not great for sure. And the bonus healing when it ends is really cool. And watchful healing is probably inspired by it, but I would rather bring a watchful healing, and even then I don't want watchful spirit, so I don't want that. So I don't know. I don't quite like it in terms of mechanics, but I really love the flavor of it. So that's a little frustrating to me because I think the flavor is stellar. It's another one of those skills that has a really neat sort of icon to it too. Oh boy, this brings us to Withdraw Hexes, which I'm telling you right now is a 1. So Withdraw Hexes is 15 energy, which is very expensive, as we have established for monks, very expensive. It is 1 second cast time, 5 second recharge, which is pretty low. It is an elite spell. Remove all hexes from target ally and all adjacent allies. This spell takes an additional 8 seconds to recharge for each hex removed in this way. Okay, so this is a 1. And I'm going to... This is a spell that I probably is one of the skills that I'm most looking forward to talking about in this entire review, at least conceptually before going into it, because this is very indicative of a problem that this game had, which is not knowing how to make release skills. So what I'm talking about, it's this concept that you hear talked about in Magic the Gathering, where they talk about like a release card or something like that, something like a Grafdigger's Cage, but some sort of thing that is narrow but aggressively powerful against specific strategies. Leyline of the Void is an example of that, where Leyline of the Void is a card that basically says your opponents do not get to use their graveyard. There's a lot of strategies that use the graveyard, your discard pile. There's a lot of strategies that use that, and so being able to shut that off, like at the very start of the game, can completely cripple some very, very powerful and degenerate strategies. It's pretty bad against decks that are not using the graveyard heavily. So, because then it's just not doing anything. You're wasting slots that could be doing something more. Withdraw Hexes is kind of like that. It takes up your elite slot, and that first sentence of remove all hexes from target ally and all adjacent allies is really powerful. Now, 15 energy is super expensive. Probably 10 would be okay. I'm not quite sure. But if you're getting into a situation where you're like, hey, I want to cure my party of hexes, theoretically, this would be really good. It's a very strong counter to that specific scenario. It's a very strong way of saying, hey, we're getting rid of all of these hexes. They are gone. The problem is that the way that they decided to balance it was that for each hex removed, it takes a huge amount of time additional to recharge. It's a lot like Shatterstorm's problem, actually. The Mesmer enchantment removal, that takes longer to recharge for each enchantment you remove. The thing is, if you want this skill to be a counter hex strategy, and theoretically that's what it's supposed to do because that's all it does. Now I'm scrolling down because there's another skill right here called Divert Hexes, which is actually much more of a counter hex strategy, kind of. Or, you know, where was it? Peace and Harmony is much, much more of a counter hex strategy. The thing is, Withdraw Hexes goes wide. It, excuse me, it clears up from your entire party. Well, not your entire party, from an ally and all adjacent allies, right? So it clears up from an AoE. So does Hexeater Signet, and Hexeater Signet gives you energy. It works backwards. you want it to have a really long recharge that goes down the more hexes it removes, because that makes it a much stronger counter strategy. One of the things that ArenaNet struggled with at various points in the game was Hexway, which was a PvP build that was all about loading the opposing party up with a ton of hexes to apply a lot of pressure to them, things that would just wear them down and cause them to eventually fall apart. There have been various times in the game where that was an extremely strong PvP strategy that could have been countered by something like Withdraw Hexes being actually playable. If Withdraw Hexes was like half second, or they didn't usually do half second for cast times, but like a quarter second cast time, 10 energy, and then like 90-second recharge, remove all hexes from target ally and say all allies in the area of that ally or something. And then this spell takes, 8 seconds less time to recharge for each hex removed in this way. Something where if you were really cleaning off a lot of hexes, it would go way down. I don't know quite where the numbers have to be calibrated, but I'm giving you the rough shape of it. That would be really interesting. I still probably wouldn't use it in PvE, but I'd give it a 2. Just because, like, it would require a specific situation where it's like, yeah, I know this is an area that's filled with hexes that I'm going to need to deal with en masse. There's other options for that, obviously, that don't take up your elite slot, such as deny hexes, purge signet, convert hexes. Expel hexes does take your elite slot, but removes 2 on a fairly low recharge. Peace and harmony is a very strong way of taking care of it. But withdraw hexes could be a really strong way of countering something like Hexway. But it's designed backwards to do that. It costs a little too much. The reason why you'd want it, by the way, to have a quarter second cast time is to be able to make it harder to interrupt, which would make it a more effective counter to that specific strategy. Because if it was like 1 second is somewhat counterable, 2 second is very easy to counter, to interrupt, I should say. Interrupt is what it is in this game. But anyway, you want your release valves to be really devastating to that strategy. And here's the thing, right? A souped up withdraw hexes that like rewards you for removing a lot of hexes is only really good against hex heavy builds. If somebody's running a team build that is not heavy on hexes, it doesn't do anything for you. You're much better off running a general skill. But and I don't even know if it would have been, like, it would have been really good, but I don't know if it would have been, like, Hexaway has to be high enough percentage that's worth one of your monks spending their elite slot on withdraw hexes. Or I guess, theoretically, depending upon the numbers. Now, you definitely want it to be 0 second if you don't have any spec in Divine Favor. Just that way, you couldn't have a non-monk using it effectively, most likely. But anyway, the point that I'm getting at is this was kind of, I think, indicative of problems that ArenaNet had to some extent, where there were just certain strategies where trying to figure out how to balance them just didn't work right. And so the thing is, you could have tools to counter them. You absolutely could. But they just didn't make those tools a thing. And a good example of that, too, is they had a problem with... Necromancers have given them a lot of problems over the years, actually. Hexway would rely partially on Necromancers, partially on Mesmers, because those tend to have some of the most hexes like that. But the other thing is, they had problems with blood magic, right? Well, you could make a skill that would turn lifesteal, like, I don't know if you would want to make it a hex or an enchantment or what, but you could make some sort of skill that would make it so that way lifesteal would cause the person to, instead of gaining health, lose health. Things like that, where, oh, you're trying to blood spike us down, well, you're pressuring yourself as a result. Things like that, where you could devise ways of making counter strategies that are not just, like, heavy-handed. And the thing is, like, withdraw hexes could be a really powerful counter to Hexway, but it's built backwards. And so that's not how you, like, you want to have, in these sorts of scenarios, you want to have these skills that can be these release valves that say, oh, this thing became too strong, it's too dominant of a strategy. Now everybody can, the skill that just absolutely trashes and hoses that strategy now has enough victims to be effective and worth bringing. Oh, that's pushing that build out. And so what you get is you get, like, the builds that prey on the teams that have withdraw hexes and therefore have weakened their monks, or weakened one of their monks. that then fall prey to the Hexway builds that then fall prey to the Withdraw Hexes builds. And that kind of shifts the metagame naturally as things fall in and out of favor. But unfortunately, it's at just the wrong spot for that. And there's a lot of lesson to be learned from that, I think. So this spell is just like... everything about its stats is just kind of wrong, unfortunately. But lots of design lessons to learn. So anyway, that's going to go ahead and wrap up Divine Favor. So until next time, everyone, take care and goodbye.